Hello BookTube, and in this video I'm going to be giving you my review of Count Magnus by M.R. James. This story first appeared in M.R. James's first collection of ghost stories called Ghost Stories from Antiquary, which was published in 1904. Whilst researching in Sweden in 1863, Mr. Raxall gets more than he bargains for as he looks into the sinister life of Count Magnus de la Gardie. Again, this is a reread for me, having read M.R. James's ghost stories quite a number of times before, and as with the previous story, Count Magnus Scrapbook, I really enjoyed Count Magnus. This is very much a more polished story than Count Albert Scrapbook. Clearly, M.R. James this has been written a bit more. He'd been practicing a bit more in terms of his ghost stories, though, as I said in the previous review, Count Albert Scrapbook isn't bad by any means. This is interesting because you get the same sort of build-up of detail about both Mr. Raxall. You get the sense of him being a middle-aged man who's very much sort of set his life around writing travel guides, and he's a man with a deep interest in history. And you get a build-up of historical detail as well about sort of the De la Gardies in Sweden, as well as bits about Swedish history. And you also get rid of biblical description because one of the sort of sinister element of Count Magnus's life is that he went on a black pilgrimage to a place called Chorazin in the Holy Land, which is one of the places, which in the Bible is where Jesus condemned the place because it wouldn't it wouldn't accept Christianity, and the suggestions of Count Magnus being involved with the devil, and all that's really well done. And also, unusual for M.R. James, it's quite gory to a degree. I should say it's not gross out gory as you would get in modern fiction, but for M.R. James it's quite gory because there's a description of where Mr. Raxall is speaking to a local Swedish gentleman who was the innkeeper where he's staying, who's telling Mr. Raxall about an event that took place that involved his grandfather, where a person sort of came up against the sort of sinister forces around the then dead Count Magnus, and one of the men involved died by having his his flesh sucked off his skull, and that's quite sort of quite gory for M.R. James, who in many cases really didn't go in for gore at all much. It's interesting he does that, and also that sort of mirrored by that sort of presages the fate of Mr. Raxall himself. Again, another sort of recurring element to this story, which I mentioned in my review of Count Albert's Scrapbook, is that though this is called a ghost story, and though Count Magnus's spirit, shall we say, appears in the book, the thing that seems to do Mr. Raxall in, and does that gentleman in, does that friend of the innkeeper's grandfather in, isn't a ghost. It's something more sinister. It's something demonic, and so that's one thing I have noticed. I've always noticed about M.R. James stories that his ghost stories don't necessarily always, in quite a number of cases, do not involve a ghost. They involve something that's demonic, satanic, sort of a definite a demon, essentially, which I've always found interesting for M.R. James being regarded as a ghost story writer when he's writing what in some cases, so this one and Count Albert's Scrapbook could be arguably described as demonic stories, as it were. Now, at the end of the story is really well done, where you get a sense of Mr. Raxall's sort of increasing paranoia and fear that he's being followed and that something's coming after him as he flees back from Sweden to England and then ultimately meets his fate. Again, I've forgotten the name of the place now, but where Mr. Raxall meets his unfortunate end, it's a real place. another sort of recurring element, as with Shrapnel can, in fact, with Warning to the Curious, which is the next story I'm going to review. You're getting told the story by a narrator, looking back on the events. Though in this case, it's obviously not one that's spoken to Mr. Wraxall. It's being done through looking at papers left behind and the like. Now, I'll just move on to the adaptation of Count Magnus, which is in fact a modern edition in the BBC's Ghost Story for Christmas series. It was done by Mark Gatiss in 2022, I believe, and it's an enjoyable one. It's really well done. It's very much follows the outline of the story very closely, and I think it does really well in giving the sort of boding sense of sort of evil that surrounds Count Magnus, the sort of around Count Magnus and particularly his tomb, and he's able to get across the sense of there being something demonic about him, and the story about him going off on his black pilgrimage to the Holy Land. That they get very much in that what I refer to as the innkeeper telling Mr. Wraxall about his grandfather's friends dying. That's depicted. That gets shown. You get to see actually that goriness of the flesh being sucked off the face, which works well. As I said before, that's unusual in M.R. James, but it's striking in the story, and it's very well done, and very strikingly depicted in the adaptation. There are some changes to this in the adaptation. So in the story, Mr. Wraxall is actually at the estate of the Delagardi family, and he's going through their sort of documents in the library. But in the story, you don't really hear much about his interaction with them. Whereas in the adaptation, he interacts with the current wife, I believe, of the current count, I think it is. And so through him, she and through her, Mr. Wraxall learns about elements of Count Magnus and sort of the Delagardi family, which in the story you just get told to you via the narrator about through Mr. Wraxall's papers and his own research. I will say one thing though. One interesting thing they did, and I think this is a slight improvement on the original story, but only a slight, is that, and I won't spoil who it is, but the narrator is changed in the adaptation, and you don't know who it is right till the end. When you learn it, it really works well, and I do like the adaptation of Count Magnus. I do have one slight gripe, which is that they have included in the story as one of the servant in the Delagardi family a black footman who is deaf. Sorry, no, he's not deaf. He can't speak, and that I feel is just irritating. That sort of forced that's tokenism. The idea that you would have in 1863 in Sweden a black footman is highly unlikely, and so that's just sort of irritating tokenism thrown in there for tokenism's sake, which is frankly typical of the modern BBC. But fortunately, it did not ruin it. It's only a slight gripe. Other than that inclusion, and to be said, that character was fine. The only issue is that you're setting it in Victorian era Sweden. The idea that you would have a black servant there is highly unlikely. So if they cast a white Swedish actor for that role, but didn't change him in terms of not being able to speak, it wouldn't have made any. There wouldn't have been any difference in that character's role in the story. It's just that it just. I'm sorry, I'm going on a bit around there, but other than that slight gripe, the adaptation is really well done, and the bit about the narrator and the sucking the face off of the skull is really well done. So with that, Budgie, I'll say goodbye, and I will see you later. Bye, Budgie.